I love horror. I have been a horror fan for a good part of my life, and even now I still enjoy watching the newest horror movie that comes out, or listening to the huge amount of horror podcasts out there. And just as much as I love horror media, I love media with queer rep, especially if it's horror. Hell, the first most prominent queer couple in a piece of media I remember was from The Walking Dead, and little 14-year-old, not quite out of the closet yet Daryl was happy to see queer characters on screen. Nowadays, I can make a whole video about why I hate The Walking Dead's handling of queer characters, but that's not the subject for today's video. Hi, I'm Daryl, and I have finally started doing more videos where I talk about things that are on my mind, and this one especially has been one I've wanted to talk about for a while. Today's topic is about recommending horror content just because there's queer rep. But before we start, I bet you're wondering what the art for today's video is. As you may know from previous videos and streams, I work on a fan-made crossover comic called Not Quite Somewhere Else. It's a crossover between the Magnus Archives podcast and the cartoon Infinity Train, and takes place after the end of the Magnus Archives as an exploration of John and Martin's relationship with each other after the events of the finale, while also being thrown into a silly train with cartoon characters in a setting that requires them to talk about their problems. In other words, they're in for the long haul. My comic has had its 2-year anniversary back in April, and this was the 2-year celebration piece. I recorded it for the art for this video, and then completely decided not to make the video until months later, because this year has been a lot. But now that's out of the way, let's talk about horror media, queer media, and horror queer media. First, I do want to mention that this is a conversation that is going to be mostly podcast focused. I know there's a lot of non-audio drama queer horror out there, but I am active in keeping up with the audio drama scene more so than with most others, and this will skew towards podcasts as this is a particular issue that I have noticed mostly in this community, along with some other friends who have noticed as well. I will also be talking a lot about Malevolent and the Magnus Archives in regards to this topic, but not because of the creators or any issue with the content in these shows. They're two of my favorite podcasts, and I already made a video about one of them, but if you plan on listening to these shows yourself and haven't yet, then you may want to stop the video here because I will be going into some pretty major spoilers in them. You have been warned. I also need to mention that I mentioned a lot of posts I've seen, but I don't have them on hand for me to read out any of the bits I'm talking about in this video. Because of that, I want to reiterate that everything in this video is my own opinion and speculation, not gospel. So I'm not expecting you to agree with me, and you can personally feel different on this topic. I don't want to be a killer of fun, just someone who's voicing their concerns. I'm not a god of horror and queer media, I'm just a fan and a writer, so let's get this started. Now, most horror doesn't bother me specifically. I have a very small list of things I tend to avoid in media that makes me upset when it shows up, and these days I rarely ever come across these things in the horror media I watch or listen to. So when a friend recommends me the newest bloody slasher or gory monster movie, I'm all for it, but I also know I'm not the majority of people. I have friends who can't stand common aspects of most horror movies like the intense situations, the gore and violence, and it would be unrealistic for me to get a friend who hates the sight of blood into enjoying something like Scream or The Thing. Everyone has different comfort levels and different things that upset them, and it's easy not to trigger someone if you're aware that horror has certain aspects that people find upsetting and may want to avoid altogether. So what does this have to do with queer representation? Well, the one great thing about the current day and age of entertainment, prominently in indie creations, don't want to give too much credit to executive producers, people up there. There are indie podcasts like Thrice Forgotten that feature almost entirely non-white and queer casts, streaming shows like Heartstopper that features many diverse queer characters, and many books and webcomics that have joined in on making their stories the way the creators want to. But there's one issue that's come out of this: only recommending things because they are quote-unquote gay. It's been a problem a lot of people I have seen posted their opinions about online in the past, mainly Tumblr, but sometimes on Twitter, and I agree with them. While there are people out there who will consume any media just for a sliver of queer rep, and of course they are valid for wanting to do so, the idea of getting people invested into something just because it's gay doesn't draw everyone into a story. There are a ton of media I've watched and read with queer rep, but they either have the most blandest of storylines, or they just were not what I was looking for. Just because it's gay doesn't always mean it's good. We love to share our interests with our friends. I do it all the time, and they don't always share them, but it becomes misleading at times if you tell someone about a media you want them to get into, and that there's a queer character or two, but they want a story summary as well, or something they can get into with some expectation of possibly enjoying it for what the media is about. Our Flag Means Death is a big one I could think of, albeit I think it's a good show with a lot of queer rep just in its first season, and I do enjoy watching it, but the one aspect of the show I find not being in the best of taste is having Ed and Steed, who are based off actual real life and horrible people, as our main protagonists in a story that's set in the way where we're supposed to sympathize with them. Personally, I think as long as people keep that in mind, I don't see an issue with enjoying the show itself, as you can enjoy media while remaining critical of the problematic aspects of it, but it may not be enjoyable with some people who find it takes it out of them actually enjoying the show. You see what I mean? And of course, people might want a show with both good character writing and queer characters. I'm critical with things I watch, and although I tend to react positively to most media I get into, if there's something I'm critical about in a piece of media, I'm very critical about it. Trust me, a lot of my favorite shows, I love them to pieces, but some of them do have some things that irk me. Recommending media only for the queer rep is not a super huge issue in and of itself, and the fact that there's bad media with queer rep isn't bad either. In fact, I'd rather have a bad story that treats its queer characters well than a good one that doesn't. But it's just something to think about when sharing media the next time a friend is looking for a new thing to get into. Now, horror media has an extra layer added onto it that gets a lot more worrisome than just recommending lackluster stories that happen to have queer rep. Podcasts in particular are thriving with queer and queer horror narratives that include types of queer representation almost never seen on TV. But a worrying trend I've noticed is that people have started recommending horror shows to people just because of the queer rep. But they'll also mention that what they're recommending is a horror show. Or that it's like, it has horror in it at all, essentially. I personally see it the most with both the Magnus Archives and Malevolent, but just for this part of the video, I'm going to focus right now on only the Magnus Archives. Now, for somebody who may not be interested in listening to the Magnus Archives, but doesn't know what it's about, the Magnus Archives features two characters, Jonathan Sims, who's our main protagonist, and Martin Blackwood, who is his love interest. There are a ton of fan-made content about the two of them, and their story in the podcast is written very, very good. They got a great, complex relationship, and it's personally my favorite podcast. I love it, and it's like one of the few like actual like romantic relationships that I've been like invested in media, because I personally am not like a most romance invested person when it comes to like me seeking media. But the thing I have noticed is that people go into the show and recommend the show without mentioning that it's a horror podcast. Lots of people who have gone into the show have expected it to be like the Office romance comedy the fandom likes to joke about it being, but then they realize that the Magnus Archives is a horror podcast. Not only that, it's a tragedy! And they get even more upset when they find out they have to wait until the end of season 4 for John and Martin to become a couple. I for one love a slow burn, but if I wanted a rom-com like how the fandom likes to portray their relationship, I would not pick the Magnus Archives as my media of choice. I especially wouldn't recommend it to people without mentioning the police brutality, manipulation, and verbal abuse that happens almost consistently through the show. It gets very dark, and in recommending it for just one queer couple, despite the many of other queer characters that are also present in the Magnus Archives, isn't something I would do without mentioning the dark topics the show does get into. It's a great show, but it's also a very, very dark show. What's even worse is people recommending horror media and promising a queer romantic relationships. Well, the actual media doesn't have any of that. And yes, before you ask, I am now talking about Malevolent. In fact, Malevolent was kind of like the reason why I wanted to talk about this subject, because it's a little... This subject in Malevolent, it gets a little irksome when it comes to me with fandom. Now, if you don't know anything about Malevolent, or you haven't watched my video recommending the show, it features two characters named Arthur Lester and John Doe. John is an entity who kind of inhabits Arthur's body and has control of his eyes, hand, and foot, and the two of them start incredibly argumentative and distrustful of each other, but as the story progresses, they become very close and very ride or die for each other. Their relationship stays platonic and doesn't go towards a more romantic direction, and I highly, if you want to learn more about their relationship but aren't interested in listening to Malevolent, or do listen to Malevolent but haven't heard this episode of a podcast yet, I recommend going to listen to Harlan Guthrie's interview with William A. Willman of Hello from the Hollowoods. It's on Spotify. I don't want to paraphrase everything Harlan says for this video. I'd rather people go listen to him themselves. I'm just a fan of the show, and Malevolent is one of my favorite podcasts out there. I love keeping up with episodes. So I'm going to link the interview down below just because he does go into topic about how he writes John and Arthur's relationship in it and what inspired him to write it the way he does. And I think insight from the creator himself is better than a fan going, well, this is what the creator says. Like some fandom saying who thinks the author's word is word of law. I love making the Eldritch Monster falls in love with the PI jokes. I like John and Arthur's relationship, and I like seeing the cute shippy fan art for it. Hell, I've drawn cute chippy fan art of the two of them, and I personally love how John and Arthur's relationship is read a lot as a clear platonic one, and how Arthur as a character has resonated so much with a lot of aromantic people. But people have started recommending it to people as a show with a canon queer romantic couple, which is not only incredibly misleading for someone looking for a show with an actual queer romantic relationship, but these recommendations leave out that not only is Malevolent a horror podcast, it is incredibly violent and gory. Arthur dies multiple times brutally in our ears. It gets very, very, very graphic. Even like I said, the Magnus Archives was a horror podcast. If you want something that's just like, oh yeah, you want a guy exploding your ears? This is the show. And I've seen posts from people I follow asking when Malevolent gets gay as they listen to it, only to find out that there's no queer romantic relationships, and they only listen to the show because they were told that there was one. And that's upsetting to me because there are shows who do have queer romantic relationships that are very explicit, even for some shows that are like extremely horrifying. Like I said, go listen to the Magnus Archives. I just don't count Malevolent as a queer horror show. It's just not there on my list. But not only that, it builds a layer of mistrust new fans have for an existing piece of media. Once again, talking about Malevolent, I have seen some posts where the new listeners of Malevolent accuse the creator of queer baiting for writing a platonic male relationship. Like, I get it, you want to see your ship smooch, but don't harass a creator just because your ship isn't canon. Like, I thought we all grew this. It's 2023. So why is this an issue? Because not everyone wants horror in their queer media. I get wanting more queer rap. Hell, I'm writing my own queer horror comic, and my other comic, The Shepherd of Oblivion, features an almost entirely queer cast of characters, but queer rep does not make horror media any less horror media, and it's no good to trigger someone just because it personally doesn't bother you when you first experience it. So what can we do? It's literally as simple as being more careful with your recommendations. Like, that's it. It's very simple. One thing I like to do before bringing up any representation a piece of media might have is to give the plot, maybe a bit about the setting or characters, then go into the rep it has, or mention the rep, then talk about what the piece of media is about, especially if it's horror. Don't tell your friend who's sensitive to gore to get into a piece of media with a bunch of gore just because you really both enjoy the gay and the gore. I love the gay and the gore. The gay and the gore is great, but it's not for everybody. You can also still talk about your favorite ship from a horror media without your friend having to experience the content if it's too upsetting for them. Like, I have one friend who can't stand gore media, and because of that, they refuse to listen to Malevolent. But they listen to me ramble about the plot and even send me memes that are sometimes about the characters because they're familiar enough about the show from what I've told them to know who the characters are. And I in turn don't go into detail about the graphic violence of the show when I talk about Malevolent with them. They just let me ramble, and I am fine with that because not everybody is gonna like the things I like. And I think the quicker that everybody realizes that, the easier it is for fandom spaces to chill out a little bit. So like in the end, just respect people's boundaries and maybe recommend some kid media with actual queer rep. I have like so many podcast recs of your romantic and non-romantic queer needs. Please watch my series about recommending podcasts. I talk about so many podcasts. I have so many podcasts I haven't gotten around to recommending yet. Just please go do that for me. On a lighter note, I do want to do more videos like this in the future and even have some ideas already. Not all of them are in the like quote-unquote discourse vein like this one is. And next time I'm actually going to save any posts I come across for any new quote-unquote discourse topic I may talk about. Otherwise, it's just going to be a whole take my word for a thing, and that's not great support for whatever point I'm trying to make. That's kind of why I had to emphasize the whole this is my opinion kind of thing, because I would have to dig through so many posts to find the posts that I was talking about for this video, and I kind of figured I kind of just didn't want to do that, and I'm not going to make that mistake next time. So there's that. I want to make more videos like this where I talk about less podcast-focused stuff or other things, and I think I can get around to doing like a video like this a month. But let me know what you think in the comments, and maybe I'll do polls in the future if I have like a bunch of topics I want to do but can't really figure it out. I think I have an idea for a video for every month this month for the rest of the year. But who knows, maybe in the future I'll have trouble deciding on topics, so that could be something fun to look forward to. Now, if you can follow my socials on the links below, as well as the links to both Not Quite Somewhere Else and The Shepherd of Oblivion. I mentioned both of those comics multiple times in this video already. And if you like this video, consider giving me a follow. I could use it. I want to try to get this channel monetized in the future, so that I can make money. I got bills to pay. And I do other non-commentary work too, like animations and shorts, and sometimes even gameplay. I'm gonna try doing the animation stuff a bit more. I know I haven't been doing it that much, but like I said, this year has been a lot, and I need to sit down. I have a whole, speaking of Malevolent, I have a whole animation for Malevolent planned that I have not been able to work on for the last couple months, which makes me sad, but I will go and work on that. Thanks for listening, have a good day, and if you like this video, consider coming back. And I'll have something different to talk about, and you can listen to me talk about that. Goodbye!